This is an okay image, I guess, but I know I can do better. The way I can do better is develop using layers. Let's explore how and why. PixInsight was created in 2004. The application has evolved a lot over the last 2 decades, but it's old. And the way to develop images has marched on, and that's a big part of why I don't develop images, I guess the usual way that many astrophotographers are doing it. I treat PixInsight much the way you might think of Lightroom to Photoshop, or Capture One to Affinity Photo. It is an area where I prepare images for finishing. This is by no means a slight on PixInsight. It's a great tool and it's very powerful. It does some things very, very well. In fact, it does a lot of things very well, but it does them in an old, inefficient way. When I finish images, I want a powerful, modern photo editor that gives me a live view of all of my edits, so I can dynamically see what's going on and make the best possible choices as I work. And among other things, I need a photo editor that can use layers. And today I'm going to be showing you why you too should finish your astro images in a photo editor that can use layers. So right here, you can see an image of the Horsehead Nebula, the Flame Nebula, the Lump Star, and Anatak. This is a nebulous region in the Orion constellation, not too far from the Great Orion Nebula. And you are seeing data that I shot about the middle of October and also just before the middle of December. Both sets of images were shot using a Williams Optics Zenith Star 81mm Apo refractor and a Player 1 Uranus C uncooled planetary camera which uses the 585 MC sensor. In October, I took 62 300-second subs using a ZWO dual-band filter. And in December, I shot 15 300-second subs using only a ZWO IR UV cut filter. Of course, if you're capturing broadband data, that goes a lot faster than using any kind of narrowband, dual-band, or tri-band filter. You might still be thinking that, well, that wasn't much time to capture all this data, but I live in a very low Bortle area. Bortle 1 to Bortle 2, so it goes pretty fast and I don't have to deal with things like light pollution. And the only time I ever have to be concerned about gradients is if I happen to be shooting on a night of a full moon. Anyway, the two sets of data were already merged and integrated, and now I'm just finishing up running a spectrophotometric color calibration on the data. So with SPCC run, it looks like we have a pretty good color balance. Now I'm going to open up all the exterminators and start by running Blur Exterminator, then Noise Exterminator, then Star Exterminator. And in this way I'm going to extract a Deconvolve star plate. I'm going to name one star plate Stars Adjusted and the other Stars Ref for reference, and then use the reference plate as a visual reference to get the Stars Adjusted plate to the right histogram. I'm then going to open the Histogram Transformation tool, open a preview window on the Stars Adjusted plate, and stretch the histogram until the Stars Adjusted plate looks like the star reference plate. Once I'm done with that, I can close the star reference plate and put it on the lower right where I put plates that I plan to dispose of later, and I'll put the Stars Adjusted plate on the lower left where I put plates that I'm going to use later. Now, I'm going to restore the nebula plate to the point where I had just run the spectrophotometric color calibration tool. That means I'll undo the Star Exterminator, Noise Exterminator, then Blur Exterminator. When that's done, I'll remove the non-deconvolved stars by running Star Exterminator again. This prepares the plate for the next step in my somewhat unusual editing process. Now I'm going to deactivate the screen transfer function, go ahead and open up the Histogram Transformation tool, and applying the histogram transformation theory that I discussed in a previous video, I'll link it here, I'm just going to quickly stretch the histogram by moving the leftmost icon right up to the beginning of the light curve, which establishes the black point, and moving the middle icon right up to the right side of the light curve. This captures all the data and creates a nice flat image that's ready for adjustment with the Curves Transformation tool. Then I'm going to name this image Working Integration. It's going to be my proof copy, the one that I do not touch going forward. It's there in case I do something dumb like accidentally delete this plate, and I'm going to need this plate as I go through the following procedure, I'm going to clone it several times. Okay, so let's get to the cloning. What we're going to do is imagine in our mind that this image exists in 3 parts. There's the Horsehead Nebula part on the right, the Flame Nebula center left, the Lump Star lower right center. There's also Anatak, but we can adjust it with the Lump Star. Each part of this image has fairly different color and luminance adjustment needs. So what we're going to do is make a clone for each section of the image use the Curves Transformation tool to adjust that section of the image till it's ideal, and then we're going to save that section to use as a layer in the next step in processing. Using the curves theory that I discussed in my Curves Transformation video linked here, I've developed the horsehead side of the image. Now, I'm going to run Noise Exterminator and then Blur Exterminator on this image. Noise Exterminator will clean up any noise, of course, and Blur Exterminator, run at the end of the process, is an excellent AI-powered sharpening tool. With a little informed adjustment of its features, it will do an amazing job sharpening the final image. This is going to take a while, so we'll skip through this. Now, I'm going to use the exact same procedure to develop the lump star, that's the tiny nebulous region lower right center, to its absolute best and attempt to not only bring out the detail, but have the lump star be dim enough that the small group of stars within it can show. They're pretty bright, they'll most likely just show as a single star, but that's fine, we just want to bring out the detail. This is a largely colorless section, so I'm not really developing for color, rather for contrast and sharpness. Now we're doing the exact same thing on another clone of the image, this time focusing on maximizing the appearance of the Flame Nebula. When it's done, we'll again run Noise Exterminator and Blur Exterminator on this clone. Now I've gone ahead and opened my preferred layer-based photo editor, Affinity Photo. If you're a Photoshop user, you probably noticed that the layout is very similar. In fact, if you know how to use one, you can easily use the other. So what I've done is drag all of my images into the layer box on the center right. Each one becomes a layer, with the horse head at the bottom forming the base layer, the flame above that, the lump star plate as the layer above the flame, and then finally the star plate at the top. I always put the star plate at the top. Then, once the star plate is in place, I'll go to the composite option center upper right and select the screen composite option. This will allow the stars to show over all the other layers. Now we're going to work with the other layers. In a nutshell, what I'm going to do is use the erase tool on each layer to erase away everything that is not the subject of interest on that layer. However, here and there will be exceptions. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll start by working with the lump star layer. The lump star is the mini white nebula lower center. The nebula at its core is very bright. It's like the trapezium cluster section of the Great Orion Nebula. So when I developed that layer, I developed it specifically to keep that section of the nebula dim. Dimming that center, though, came at the expense of losing some of the outer cloud cover on the outside of the lump star nebula. So what I've done is I've set my erase brush to 10 flow and 0 hardness so it makes a nice soft erase stroke. And on the lump star layer, I'm going to erase out the region of space around the lump star nebula. This will reveal the lump star as it appears in the Flame Nebula layer below it. The Flame Nebula layer was developed for dimmer ranges, so it shows those dim clouds surrounding the lump star nebula better. I'm using a small erase brush here, set for a low flow and hardness rate, so that there is a nice soft transition between the dark space around the lump star nebula and the rest of the image. Once I have that adequately erased out, I'm going to make the brush much larger and set the flow and hardness to 100 and erase out the rest of the lump star nebula layer. We're not going to need the rest of it. I'll just quickly speed through the process of erasing out the rest of the layer. It goes very quickly and easily. And when it's done, the entire lump star layer is erased away, except for the one tiny section around the lump star nebula, where it restrains the brightness of the core of the nebula so that we can see the stars within. Now we're going to work with the flame layer. However, we have a much more powerful tool at our disposal here than the erase tool. We're going to go to the compositing options right over the layer box, center right, and we're going to select the soft light compositing option. This will treat the image as if a diffuse light is shining over it, illuminating anything of substance, which is anything where we find light, and passing through dark areas. This will darken all the space around the nebula, while softly and gently bringing out all of our subject matter. Compositing is a very powerful tool, and it has another advantage here as well. It's like the soft light composite carries over desirable traits of saturation and sharpness to the layer below. This allows the rich color and contrast of the flame captured in the layer below to be added to our image of the flame in the flame-based layer, and provides additional detail and complementary contrast. It does the same to the image of the horse head on the right. However, it does introduce one small problem. It creates a bit of oversaturation in the faint structures to the left and right of the Horsehead Nebula's cloud, and that creates some blotchy artifacts. We saw similar artifacts in my previous video on processing the Soul Nebula. and we're going to deal with these artifacts in the same simple way. We're going to open a Gaussian blur layer and put it near the very top, just below the stars, so it affects every layer beneath. And then we're going to crank up the blur, just enough to soften those areas, effectively getting rid of the hypersaturation artifacts. Then, with the Gaussian blur layer selected, we're going to open up the Erase tool again, and set the hardness and flow to 100, and erase out everywhere that we don't want the blur to apply, which is everywhere except for the faint structures in the right center and upper center and lower right of the Horsehead Nebula in the red cloud. That process goes very quickly, but I've decided I want to restore a little bit of the detail to the nebulous cloud, so I'm going to make the brush small, set the hardness for about 50%, and pass the brush once in quickly over the structures at the edge of the cloud and up along the side to restore some of the fineness and detail without going so far as to reintroduce the artifacts. And when it's all said and done, our final image looks like this. Let's compare this to the best I was able to accomplish by developing the entire image as a single layer in PixInsight. On the left is the image you saw at the beginning of this video. It's not bad, but it's not great either. The right image has many superior traits. It is sharper, crisper, colors are richer, and each individual structure is more distinct. Applying the power of layers has allowed us to focus development on maximizing the appearance of each structure in the image, getting the very best possible out of it. In a layer-based photo editing application such as Photoshop or Affinity Photo, those layers can then be recombined in a number of ways, such as making the layer partially transparent, or erasing out sections of it, or compositing various layers together. In this tutorial, we erased out sections of the lump star layer and composited the flame-focused and horsehead-focused layers together. We also used compositing to reintroduce the star layer back into the images, and then selectively applied a Gaussian blur layer to the other layers to mitigate the appearance of saturation-caused artifacts. Finally, though not covered in this video, an unsharp mask was added to the horsehead layer to add detail to the horsehead itself, especially around the base. And then, an aesthetically based choice was made to increase the contrast of the dark space, in order to allow the individual structures to stand out a bit better as distinct entities. I know I go about editing astro images differently from the way that's typical, so you may have questions. If so, feel free to let me know. Please post them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and please take a moment to hit that like button, and if you don't mind, subscribe. And as always, get out there and shoot the sky.